Hello. Welcome to the June Wellness Chat for our ACTS Retirement Life Communities. My name is Dr. Kelly O'Shea Carney, and I'm the Corporate Director of Memory Care Services here at ACTS. And in this era of our COVID response, I am also helping to lead the psychosocial supports for our staff, for our residents, and for the family members of our residents. We know that coronavirus has presented unprecedented challenges to everyone who takes part in our communities, and we're very interested in providing the kinds of information, supports, and services that are going to help people to maintain their well-being throughout these difficult times. So our presentation today is titled Finding Happiness and Well-Being in a Pandemic. And I guess my first question for you as we begin today is, do you think it's possible to find happiness and well-being in this time of pandemic? I hope that your answer to the question is yes, but if it's not, let me share some information with you that I hope will change your mind about whether or not we can be happy and well during these difficult times. So as we get started, there are several questions that we're going to be addressing in this presentation. Is it possible to be happy in a time of pandemic or during other kinds of crises? And how does stress, the stress especially related to COVID-19, how does that impact our emotional well-being? And is anxiety a good thing or a bad thing? And how can we manage stress and anxiety, particularly in these challenging times? And finally, we'll be talking about how can we maintain overall well-being during such a challenging time. So as we get started, I want to check in with you first, and I'd like you to think for yourself how you would respond to this question. On a scale from 1 to 10, what is your current stress level? Now, a 1 means that you're thinking, there's really not a lot of stress right now. Life is pretty easy peasy, and I'm not too worried about things. A 5 might be, well, I'm feeling that stress, but it's not horrible. And a 10 would mean, this is really bad. I am feeling this stressed and I'm pretty overwhelmed and this is difficult for me. So take a moment. If you have a place to write it down, you might write down your number or at least hold it in your head. What is your stress level right now? And after you've answered that question, answer another question. The next question is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how well are you coping with your stress? And a 1 would mean, I'm not coping at all. What's coping? I can't even imagine how to cope in this moment. And a 5 might mean, well, I'm doing okay. I'm doing some coping and I'm sort of holding things in check, but I really could be better. And a 10 would mean, I am doing great. I am really coping very well with everything that's been put in front of me. Now, the reason that I'm asking you these questions as we get started is because I wanted to point out that there is a sort of balancing act between stress and coping. And as stress goes up, it is our coping that will help to compensate for that stress and hopefully keep us in some kind of balance. And so stress can be affected by a lot of different things. On some level, it depends on how we're hardwired. What kind of person am I? Am I the sort of person that tends to be a little bit more anxious or worried about things? Am I a pretty easygoing person? And do I take things as they come? Stress also is affected by the circumstances that you're in and what you are having to do or be faced with in this moment. If you know someone who's been sick, if you've had a loved one perhaps who's been affected by COVID, then your stress might be higher than someone else who has not had those experiences. So again, we're all going to experience the stress of this moment differently, and frankly, the stress of life differently. But as our stress levels go up, what we hope is that our coping skills are also going up, so that even though the stress is increasing, and oftentimes we can't control that stress, but what we can control is our response to it. And we want to try to hold those two things in balance. So what I'm hoping is that as you wrote down your numbers, hopefully those two numbers are similar. If your stress is at a 10, well, then I hope your coping's at a 10. If your stress is at a 5, well, then maybe your coping's at a 5. And if your stress is low, well, then maybe your coping might be good, but you don't need to be coping at a high level because you're not feeling that stress. The point is keeping it in balance. Now, I'm using this word a lot, stress. I'm talking about this, and I thought maybe it would be a good idea to stop for a moment and talk about, well, what exactly is stress anyway? So stress is really a response by your body and by your mind to a perceived threat in your life. And it's actually an evolutionary response. The stress response is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Human beings survived in the days when life could be very threatening. They survived in part because they were capable of a stress response. So when we feel that perceived stress, like a big old black bear, right? Imagine yourself as one of your ancestors thousands of years ago, and you've gone out to maybe gather a few blueberries for your dinner tonight. And as you're out in the world, you come around a giant bear like this, who is quite literally a threat to your well-being. And you needed to be able to react in that moment. And so the stress response was designed to help you react in a way that would keep you alive. So blood pumps to your heart, to your lungs, to your muscles, so that you are prepared to react and respond on a physical level. Your mind will race and your thoughts go very quickly because you have to be able to figure out what you're going to do next. Your GI system shuts down, your emotions become heightened because you need the motivation to be able to respond. So anything in your body that is not necessary slows down, and all the things that were going to help you to either fight that big old bear or run from that big old bear, in other words, the fight or flight response, all of those things are happening in your body at one time. So again, the stress response in and of itself is actually a very good thing because it has allowed us and our ancestors to actually survive when threats were present. But this is a different kind of time. If you ran into a big old bear like this out on your blueberry hunt, that stressor lasted for a short time. Either you would turn and fight that bear and hopefully you would win that fight, or you'd turn and run and hopefully you could outrun the bear, and then you would go on to enjoy your blueberries and live your life. So the stress happened for a moment, your body geared up, your mind geared up, you reacted, and then things settled down again. In a moment like this with coronavirus, this is going on for months. And more than that, it's sort of an unseen threat. We all know that it's there, and we all feel that sense of there is a threat and I need to be able to respond, but there's no resolution. There's nothing to fight. There's nothing to flee. There's just sort of this generalized awareness that things are not as they are supposed to be. And for that reason, in this kind of situation, stress can wear us down because our bodies were never meant to be in that fight or flight response for an extended period of time, and in particular with kind of an unseen and poorly understood kind of threat like the one that we're facing now. So when scientists have studied how people respond in crises like this one, what they find is when you've got these kind of long-term crises that kind of roll out over a period of time and have a lingering effect on people's well-being, there are several stages that folks move through. So first, it begins with a sort of anticipatory anxiety. So maybe you can think back to the the end of February, and we started to hear about coronavirus. We knew this thing was coming. We knew we were going to have to do something to keep ourselves and our communities safe. We were going to have to batten down the hatches somehow, but we didn't know what that was going to mean. And there was a sort of anxiety that many of us were feeling about what will it be like and what will we have to do. And then the moment came, and we had to close our communities, no more visitors, people were sheltering in place. We had to change everything about our routines, the way we experience meals and socialization and activities, and suddenly everything about life was different. And when that first happened, there was sort of this heroics, this surge to a solution. We were all in this together. We were going to be able to do it. We were grateful for one another, and we were all willing to do what we had to do to keep ourselves and one another safe. That was probably in early to mid-March that we were feeling that way. But now this has been going on for a while. And what we know from watching people go through other crises in other places in the world, like when a tsunami hits a small island, or when we think about in the days after 9/11, what we know is after that surge to solution, as time wears on and life is really changed by this crisis, people start to wear down. And some of that is because the stress itself is wearing us down. That fight or flight response is going on and on and on. Our bodies can't sustain it. Our minds can't sustain it. And it's in this phase of disillusionment and exhaustion that people really become most psychologically vulnerable. This is the stage at which people maybe become a little more anxious, a little more depressed. Maybe they're more irritable. Maybe they become a little more withdrawn and don't really have the energy anymore. So we know that this is a difficult period, and this is a period where the stress management techniques and self-care become so important. But interestingly, here's the other thing that scientists tell us, is we know that even after the crisis itself is resolved and life begins to return to a little bit of a normal pace and routine, people still have a little recovery to do. Now, for the most part, people are pretty resilient. And so most folks are going to need to rest, they're going to need to catch their breath, and they're going to begin to recover from this moment of crisis. But for some, and especially for those who have had a particularly difficult time, maybe they've lost a loved one, maybe their health was really affected by this, or maybe the loneliness and the fatigue has taken a toll and they've become depressed. For those folks, the recovery may take a little longer. People may bear a few scars or wounds that they need to work their way through. So we know that this thing is a marathon, not a sprint, and managing the impact of the stress of coronavirus is going to take some extra effort by all of us. So remember that question that I asked in the beginning? Is it possible to be happy in a time like this, when there are so many uncertainties, when life is so different from the way it used to be before, when there is this sort of unseen threat and we don't really know how to react to it? Can we be happy? Well, the science tells us, yes, we can be happy. There's an entire field of psychology called positive psychology, and scientists have studied this. And it's really interesting. What they have found is the happiest people are not necessarily happy because of their life circumstances. We tend to think that it's our circumstances in life that will make us either happy or unhappy. But what scientists have found is that almost 50% of happiness is determined on some level by genetics. So some of it's how you're hardwired. Are you somebody who tends to be more optimistic? Are you somebody who tends to be a little bit more socially oriented? Are you somebody who tends to be a little bit more active? And those are things that in part come from our genetic makeup. Now, even if you're not hardwired as an optimist or a social kind of person or somebody who likes to be active, that doesn't mean you can't be happy, because the other 50% of what determines our happiness comes somewhat from our life circumstances, but really the majority of it comes from our habits and our choices. And what the research in positive psychology tells us is that people who choose to focus on relationships, on faith or a relationship with something greater than ourselves, on having a sense of purpose in life, on being active and feeling like they're making a contribution, those are the people who are the happiest. And so it's a whole lot about what are the routines that we use? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we relate to the world around us? That's what helps us to be happy, even when life circumstances are difficult. So let's talk a little bit about those kinds of habits and choices that you might be able to select for yourself. And I want to think about this in terms of this idea of holistic well-being. How can we be well in mind and body and spirit? And it really is important to think about all three of these areas, because we might do a really great job taking care of our body, and maybe we eat well, maybe we exercise, maybe we do some of those right things. But if we're not also managing our well-being in mind and spirit, we're not going to be as balanced. We're not going to be as resilient in the face of life challenges or a moment like this where there are so many demands and stressors. So it really is important for us to think about how can we attend to all three parts of the self in terms of what we choose, where we put our focus, the things that we do to help us cope, to keep that coping number as high as the stress number might be. And by talking about self-care in terms of body. You know, there's that old saying about if you have your health, you've got it all. And there is some truth to that when we are in good health, when our bodies are well, it does make it easier to feel better in mind and in spirit. It's not the only determinant, but it does make it easier when we take care of ourselves. So here are some simple choices and habits that you can develop that will help you to take care of yourself and, frankly, enhance your self of well-being in terms of your body. So those things include, number one, breathe. And I know that sounds crazy, right? Of course we breathe. We have to breathe or we don't live. But here's what happens in that stress response. Sometimes we become shallow breathers. So instead of breathing slowly and deeply, which actually is the best for us in terms of both relaxation and getting oxygen into our bodies, we tend to become high chest breathers. We're breathing fast, we're breathing hard, but we're not breathing deep and we're not breathing intentionally. So just taking a few minutes, a couple times a day, to breathe deeply in through your nose and out through your mouth as if you were whistling. Just several deep breaths like that, you will find will calm and soothe your body. In addition, exercise. Boy, when a person's under stress, there's nothing like moving. And of course, the greatest danger for all of us right now as we shelter in place is that we stop moving. But it's important to get exercise. And as much as possible, you want to do a little bit of cardiac exercise, cardio, and you'd want to do a little bit of stretching. So cardio exercise can be as simple as stand up from your chair several times in a row, or march in place if you can do that. If you can get outside and take a walk, that's even better. If you happen to be in one of our communities that has started to open the exercise facilities and the pools, then that's even better yet. In addition to that kind of cardio exercise that works your heart and your lungs, stretching is so important. When we're stressed out, actually we build up more cortisol and other kinds of stress hormones in our muscles. So when you stretch, it can help to release some of those stress hormones from your body and help it to move through yourself, and you will feel more relaxed and at peace. The other thing is drink water. And I know you all know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but drink as much good water as you can. And that's different from drinking a soda, drinking juice, drinking alcohol, all of which tastes good and we may do from time to time. But drinking water, your body needs to flush out toxins. And again, especially in stressful times. And did you know that current recommendations right now actually say that 10 8-ounce glasses of water is ideal. So if you can do it, drink a lot of water every day. The other thing that's so important is sleep and being able to get at least 7 hours of sleep. But scientists are now saying between 7 and 9 is really kind of the sweet spot. So being able to get enough sleep. And here's why sleep is so important, is not only does it rejuvenate your body to sleep, but also your brain. Scientists are learning now that when we sleep, and particularly in the second half of the night is dedicated to removing toxins and other debris from our brains. It's almost like it's a cleaning cycle for our brains in those second 4 hours of sleep. So the less hours of sleep you get, the less hours you get of those cycles that are helping to clean your brain of toxins and help you feel truly refreshed. Of course, diet is important too. And when we're under stress, there can be that tendency to want to reach for the sweets or reach for the salty foods. And a little bit of that in moderation is fine, of course. But what we really need right now is that well-balanced diet that your mother and your grandmother told you to eat, with lots of vegetables and fruits and lean meats and eating in moderation. These things give our body the fuel we need to feel good and to keep going. And if you are feeling the stress of this moment and you've got a bit of a fight or flight response going on, that fuel is increasingly important for you. And then finally, last but not least, it's really important to limit screen time. You know, we can all be so drawn to the television and social media and news, and we want to learn about what's happening in the world around us, or maybe we just want a break and we're watching kind of mindless TV. But in either case, the more time we spend connected to a screen, a couple things happen. Number one, you're probably not moving. Number two, those might be the moments where you're eating and drinking the things that aren't as good for you. And number three, too much screen time actually alters the way your brain works and how you think. And it's really important to try to limit that amount of screen time and to fill your days with more productive and helpful kinds of activities. Next, let's talk about self-care for the mind, right? So it's equally important to take care of our minds, but you know, on some level, I think this can be harder. It can be more difficult to take care of our minds than it is even to take care of our bodies. And that's because we often don't exercise the same level of discipline over where our minds go or what we do with our thoughts. But let me share a few strategies with you that really will help you to have a healthier mind and to feel better. So first of all, I encourage you to identify where you do and don't have control. In a moment like this, there is very much a sense of not being in control. And frankly, there's a lot we can't control. We cannot control worldwide pandemic. We cannot control shelter-in-place orders. We cannot control the fact that scientists are still trying to figure out this virus. But what we can control is what we do while we are sheltering in place. How do we spend our time? How do we create meaning in our lives? How do we connect with others? So I encourage you to take a few minutes, and for every worry that you might have or anxiety that you're struggling with, make a note of, okay, what can I not control, but what can I control? And then spend your time and energy focusing on what you can control. In addition to that, if you find yourself having negative thoughts, if you find yourself thinking things like, this is never going to be over, or I cannot survive this another day, if you find yourself having those kinds of negative thoughts, it's really important to stop yourself, because those negative thoughts can take control and carry you in a bad direction. So I know it might sound crazy, but I actually encourage you to say to yourself out loud, stop. Those thoughts are not helpful. This will not go on forever. It's going to end at some point, and probably soon. And I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there and I'm managing. In addition to controlling those negative thoughts, I encourage you to try to shift your focus and shift your mind, and to try to adopt a position of mindfulness. So what psychology teaches us about mindfulness is it's an intentional focus on the moment. So if you are eating your breakfast, really focus on the taste, the texture, the aromas of your breakfast, and enjoy that. If you're opening up a window, feel that breeze as it blows in. Listen for the bird song. Take a look at the beautiful flowers and the trees that are blooming here in the spring. Be mindful and be present in the moment, and try to really enjoy what is in front of you rather than on focusing on what is not in front of you or what is not possible. This goes hand in hand, of course, with practicing gratitude. You know, I think our grandparents taught us many years ago, Count your blessings. Be grateful for what you have. And positive psychology is teaching us that that really is incredibly important, and that people who take time to intentionally be grateful for the blessings of their lives, they tend to be happier people. They tend to be more content people. So keep a gratitude journal. Make sure you tell the people around you how much you appreciate them and how grateful you are for them. Pay attention to the little blessings in your life, like the bird song, like the flowers outside your window, and focus on those things as much as possible. In addition to that, it is so important to just be gentle with yourself. You know, we can get a little hard on ourselves sometimes, and we might think things like, I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be feeling this way. And rather than beat yourself up for what you are or are not doing, or what you think should be different, try to be affirming. You know, you may say something like, I don't exercise every day, but when I stretch, I feel very good, and I'm glad that I do that. Or I may be missing my family right now, but I am so glad that I have a wonderful family, and there's a lot for me to be proud of in these relationships I've created. Be gentle with yourself and affirm the good that you have done in the world. The other thing that is really important, as much as possible, create some routines and rituals that will help to carry you through each day in a healthful way. Make sure that you get up at the same time each day. Make your bed, if that's something that you're used to doing. Make your bed, do the dishes, clean up your home so that it feels neat and comfortable for you. Carve out time for the things that matter. Carve out time for a little exercise. Maybe carve out time for making a favorite meal that will be healthy for you. Carve out time to connect with family and friends. Maybe carve out time for prayer. But create a routine, create a ritual that moves you through your day so that you feel in control of your day, but also so that you're doing things you feel good about. And again, I'm going to say, minimize that media exposure. Scientists have looked at the responses of people in other times of crisis, like, for example, after the 9/11 bombings or after the Boston Marathon bombing. And what they found is the people who spent the most time watching media coverage of those crises, those people had more trauma after the event was over than the people who had turned off the TV. So part of keeping your mind healthy and well is making sure that you do not overexpose yourself to the very things that might make you feel anxious, worried, or out of control. A little bit of good information is a good thing, but be careful about where you look for your media. The CDC, the World Health Organization, a really good quality news outlet. These are places that you can go in limited ways, get your information, but not overwhelm yourself. And that is one way that we can take care of our minds. So in addition to taking care of our minds, we also need to take care of our spirit. And you know, this is the one that I think sometimes gets forgotten. We may remember to take care of our bodies. We may strive to be a little bit more disciplined in our thoughts and in our mindful habits. But sometimes we forget about spirit. And spirit, I think, is perhaps a little easier to not pay attention to, only because it's a little harder to get our arms around. It's a little more nebulous when we think about it. But here are some ways that we can take care of our spiritual selves. So number one, carve out time for spiritual practices. And you know, depending on who you are, what your faith beliefs are, what your faith tradition is, those spiritual practices will vary. For some people, it may be prayer. For some people, it may be reading scripture. For others, maybe it's meditation. For others, it might be as simple as getting outside and spending time in nature. But whatever is a spiritual practice for you, make time for that. In the same way, you're going to make time to be grateful and make time to eat good food and to exercise. It's important to carve out time for that spiritual experience in your life. Now, I mentioned this a moment ago. For some people, it is a spiritual practice in and of itself to be in nature. But if that's not always something that you connect with a spiritual practice, I still recommend to you spending time with nature is important. We know the Creator through creation. And the more that we can spend time in the outdoors, surrounded by the beauty of the natural world, the more it helps to remind us that we are part of a much bigger picture and that there is so much beauty and so much good in that bigger picture. And it can help to settle us and to soothe us. There's actually something in Japan, they refer to it as tree bathing. But there's been research on this idea about tree bathing, spending time out in nature among the trees, and they can actually monitor the ways in which it improves your physical and mental health by simply being in nature. The other thing that's so important to do at a time like this is we are so confronted with the challenges in our world and the struggles and the things that are not going well. But it's really important to turn your gaze onto all the good that is in you and in the world. And there is an awful lot of good in this world. Pay attention to the people around you and the small acts of kindness that you see. Look for the ways in which you yourself exercise those small acts of kindness on behalf of others. Look for the ways in which good is happening in the world. You can look at the frontline responders in our healthcare system. You can look at the good souls who go to work every day in their essential jobs, the risks that they take to make sure that you and I have what we need and can continue to live our lives. There is so much that's good in the world, and paying attention to that good and recognizing that that good is moving through the world even as the struggles are unfolding. That will help you to feed your spirit and to feed that part of you that sees yourself as part of a larger whole that has meaning and purpose. The other thing is take time to simply be still and know. Whatever it is you hold in your heart as a faith belief, whatever it is that speaks to your spiritual self, give yourself time to be still, to know that, and to trust. Trust that the world is unfolding as it should, in spite of all the challenges around us. Trust and know that people are good in their hearts and in their souls, and even when things aren't going well, there is still a spiritual peace and wellness in the world around us. Be still and try to know that. And the more you can be still within yourself, the more that you will calm in body and mind. And finally, and very importantly, look for opportunities to help others. Even if you're sheltering in place, even if you're not able to leave your apartment, there are so many things that you can do to be helpful for others. There are opportunities to volunteer in your community. Right now, I know we're looking for volunteers who will help to create some engagement activities and engagement kits that will go to your friends and neighbors in Willowbrook Court and Oak Bridge Terrace. You might be able to make a phone call to somebody who's alone and doesn't have a lot of family. You might be able to sit down and write a note to one of your family members or loved ones and to tell them how much they mean to you. But here's why helping others is important. First and foremost, most of our great faith traditions tell us that it is important to do unto others as we would want done to us, to be kind, to be helpful, to try to build the kingdom. These are things that we're encouraged to do. But when we do those things, we also feel better about ourselves. It gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of meaning. It takes our mind off the troubles that we're experiencing and helps us to simply feel better about the world and ourselves. So look for those opportunities to reach out to others. And last but certainly not least, one of the key findings of positive psychology and the research into happiness is that relationships are critical to our well-being. And the happiest people are those that have good, long-lasting, meaningful, rewarding relationships. Now, I think no one gets to be the age that we all are without learning something about relationships. And the most important thing I think we learn is that they take investment, right? We have to be willing to invest our time. We have to be willing to offer our attention to those relationships. We need to affirm what is good about those relationships, tell the people we love that we love them, and we need to be willing to share a bit of ourselves. And sometimes that sharing of ourselves may even be the kind of vulnerable sharing where we say, you know what, this is hard for me. I'm struggling a little bit. But that kind of sharing allows the other person to share too. Right now, in this moment of challenge, I really encourage you, invest time in your relationships, your family, your friends, your loved ones. Pay attention to those relationships. Give them extra time. You know, we're so blessed that this coronavirus crisis came at a time when at least we had the technology to stay connected. And whether that's a phone call or a letter dropped in the mail, or getting together by FaceTime or video conference, or gathering for a hallway, social distanced kind of gathering with our friends and neighbors. Look for the opportunities to connect, because it is through connecting with one another that we are taking care of ourselves, taking care of one another, and that's how we all get through this together. Now, having talked about all the things that we can do to enhance our well-being, to create the habits and the choices that will lead us to happiness, even in the context of that, there may be moments where this challenge in life or others get the better of us. And when that happens, it's really important to recognize it and to ask for help. The saying I have here is name it to tame it. If we don't acknowledge that we're struggling, and if we don't look for a way to try to make that better by sharing it with others, sometimes the struggle just continues. So please don't be afraid. If you are a little depressed, if you are a little anxious, if you're finding yourself out of sorts and a little irritable, and you don't find that the support you're getting from family and friends is quite what you need to get through it, please don't be afraid to ask for help. Our communities have many staff who are there to help you and are happy to do so. You can reach out to your chaplain. You can reach out to our wellness office staff. You can even reach out to your executive director and just say, you know what, this has been hard for me. I think I could use a little bit more help. And if you can do that, we will make sure that you get the additional support you need to get through these difficult times. You know, these challenges that we're facing right now, they are truly unprecedented. These are difficult times, and there are no easy answers, and we're still just trying to figure out what to do about this virus. And yet, everything that we need to thrive is really within our control and right at our fingertips. And it has to do with the simple things that we choose in relation to ourselves, to others, and to our world. You know, I'm reminded of that wonderful book published many years ago titled Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, there's a little bit of that principle at play. Everything we need to know to maintain our happiness and maintain our well-being in the face of this pandemic, we kind of already know it. We know how to take care of our mind and our body and our spirit. And we know that relationships are important and that having a relationship with something bigger than ourselves in a spiritual sense will help to keep us going in difficult times. We know these things. Now is the time that we have to reconnect with that wisdom. Make the choices that will help us to really intentionally pursue those kinds of activities and habits and relationships, and to allow ourselves to enjoy all the good and all the happiness that our lives have to offer, even in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. So thank you so much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure to talk with you. I do hope you'll try some of what we talked about. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you feel like you'd like more information or more help in pursuing some of these things. So please stay healthy and be well. Thank you.